For 25 years, families thought they were burying their loved ones at Williams' funeral home. Instead, they were burying plastic mannequins while Marcus Williams sold their organs on the black market for $200 million. The bodies? They were never in the coffins. Welcome back to Crime Secrets, where we expose the predators who exploit our most vulnerable moments. Today's case isn't just about theft. It's about how one man weaponized grief to build a multi-million-dollar organ trafficking empire. This is the story of Marcus Williams, the funeral director who turned mourning into money, and the thousands of families who unknowingly buried empty coffins while their loved ones were sold piece by piece. What you're about to hear will make you question every funeral, every burial, and every person who promises to honor the dead. Marcus Anthony Williams was born into the funeral business in 1965 in Cleveland, Ohio. His father, Robert Williams, owned a small neighborhood funeral home that had served the African-American community for over 30 years. Growing up surrounded by death, grief, and grieving families, Marcus learned early how to comfort people in their darkest moments. After his father's death in 1995, Marcus inherited Williams' funeral home, along with its sterling reputation and deep community connections. The business was struggling financially. Many families in the neighborhood couldn't afford elaborate funerals, and Marcus was constantly operating on thin margins. But Marcus had always been fascinated by the human body. During high school, he had considered medical school before settling on mortuary science. He completed his education at Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, where he excelled in anatomy and embalming techniques. His professors remembered him as unusually interested in organ preservation and surgical procedures. What they didn't know was that Marcus was already planning to use his medical knowledge for something far more sinister than preserving the dead. By 1998, Marcus had transformed Williams' funeral home from a struggling neighborhood business into Cleveland's most trusted death care provider. He expanded to serve all communities, not just African-American families, and built a reputation for compassionate service and attention to detail. Marcus's secret to success wasn't just customer service, it was his discovery of how profitable human organs could be on the black market. A single human body could generate between $100,000 and $250,000 in organ sale, compared to the $3,000, $8,000 profit from a traditional funeral service. Marcus began researching the organ trafficking industry extensively. He learned which organs were most valuable. Hearts, livers, kidneys, and corneas commanded the highest prices. He studied preservation techniques, transportation methods, and most importantly, how to connect with buyers who wouldn't ask questions about the source of their products. The beauty of Marcus's operation was its simplicity. Families brought him their deceased loved ones, paid for funeral services, and left their most precious possessions in his care. They trusted him completely because that's what funeral directors do. They provide comfort in times of unimaginable grief. Marcus's organ harvesting operation was methodical and efficient. Within hours of receiving a body, he would conduct what he called his assessment, determining which organs were viable for sale based on the deceased's age, health history, and cause of death. Working alone in his embalming room during overnight hours, Marcus would perform what amounted to surgical dismemberment. Using tools and techniques learned in mortuary school, he would carefully remove hearts, livers, kidneys, corneas, and even bone tissue. Each organ was preserved in specialized containers and prepared for transport to buyers across the country. To hide the evidence of his butchery, Marcus became expert at cosmetic restoration. He would stuff body cavities with newspaper or cotton, use makeup and clothing to conceal incisions, and ensure that families viewing the body at visitations would never suspect what had been done. For families who chose cremation, Marcus's job was even easier. After harvesting organs, he would cremate the remaining body parts and present families with ashes that contained no trace of his crimes. The most diabolical aspect of Marcus's operation was how he exploited the trust placed in funeral directors. Families were grieving, overwhelmed, and completely dependent on his expertise. They never questioned his procedures, never demanded to inspect the body after preparation, and never suspected that their loved one was being mutilated for profit. Marcus didn't work alone in his organ trafficking empire. Over the years, he built relationships with corrupt medical professionals, transplant coordinators, and black market organ brokers who helped him move his harvested products to buyers around the world. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a transplant surgeon at Cleveland Medical Center, became Marcus's primary contact in the legitimate medical world. Dr. Reynolds was facing mounting gambling debts and agreed to help Marcus by providing medical documentation, that made stolen organs appear to come from legitimate donors. Marcus also connected with Viktor Kozlov, a Russian immigrant who ran an international organ trafficking network. Kozlov provided Marcus with preservation equipment, transportation logistics, and most importantly, wealthy buyers who paid premium prices for organs without questions about their origin. The operation became so sophisticated that Marcus was processing an average of 15-20 bodies per month for organ harvesting. He had turned Williams Funeral Home into a front for what federal investigators would later call the largest organ trafficking operation in American history. For years, Marcus's operation ran smoothly, but there were several close calls that should have exposed his crimes. In 2015, the family of deceased businessman Robert Chen requested an independent autopsy after suspicious circumstances surrounding his death. When the medical examiner opened the body, they discovered that major organs were missing and had been replaced with newspaper. Marcus managed to convince authorities that this was standard practice for bodies that had been autopsied at hospitals, and the incident was dismissed as a paperwork error. But privately, Marcus knew he needed to be more careful about which bodies he targeted for harvesting. Another near miss occurred in 2018 when funeral home inspector Janet Morrison noticed discrepancies in Marcus's cremation records. The weight of ashes returned to families was significantly lower than expected based on the deceased's body weight. Marcus explained this as a result of more efficient cremation techniques, and the issue was dropped. Marcus's downfall began in 2020 when Sarah Mitchell, whose husband had been processed through Williams Funeral Home 3 years earlier, decided to have his body exhumed for reburial in a family plot. When the coffin was opened, cemetery workers discovered it contained only a plastic mannequin dressed in her husband's clothes. Sarah immediately contacted police, who launched an investigation into Williams Funeral Home. Detective James Rodriguez, who led the investigation, initially thought they were dealing with a single case of fraud. But as they began examining other burials from Williams Funeral Home, a pattern of systematic body trafficking emerged. Federal investigators discovered that Marcus had been maintaining detailed records of his organ sales, including buyer information, prices, and shipping records. In his office safe, they found over $2 million in cash and documentation, showing organ sales totaling nearly $200 million over 25 years. On March 15, 2023, federal agents raided Williams Funeral Home and Marcus's private residence simultaneously. What they found shocked even experienced investigators. Marcus's embalming room contained surgical equipment far beyond what any funeral home would need, preservation containers for organ transportation, and a freezer containing body parts waiting to be shipped. Computer records revealed the full scope of Marcus's network. He had been selling organs to buyers in 15 different states and 6 foreign countries. Dr. Patricia Reynolds and Viktor Kozlov were arrested within days as federal agents dismantled the entire trafficking operation. Most disturbing was the discovery of Marcus's client database, detailed records of over 3,000 families whose loved ones had been violated. The database included notes about which organs had been harvested, sale prices, and even Marcus's personal observations about grieving family members. Marcus Williams pleaded guilty to federal charges of organ trafficking, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dr. Reynolds received 25 years, while Viktor Kozlov was extradited to Russia to face charges there. The Williams Funeral Home case led to nationwide reforms in funeral home oversight, including mandatory inspections, body tracking systems, and stricter licensing requirements for mortuary professionals. The Marcus Williams case exposed a horrifying vulnerability in one of our most sacred institutions. For 25 years, thousands of families trusted him with their most precious possessions, the bodies of their loved ones. Instead of honoring that trust, Marcus violated it in the most grotesque way imaginable. 3,000 families discovered they had been mourning over empty graves while their loved ones were butchered and sold like meat. The psychological trauma of learning that their grief had been exploited for profit may never heal. If this case horrified you as much as it horrified us, please subscribe to Crime Secrets for more investigations into institutional corruption and the predators who exploit our deepest vulnerabilities. Because sometimes, the people we trust in our darkest moments are the ones planning to profit from our pain.